Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whichever time zone you are currently in. I am quite delighted to welcome all of you to today's roundtable, which happens to be the fifth for this year, 2025, and the 18th roundtable organized by the Initiative for the Study of Asian Catholics, or ISAC. Today's roundtable is extra special. Of course, all our roundtables are special, but today's quite extra special because this is part of ISAC's activities for our fourth anniversary. So let me thank you all for your support, for engagement with, and interest in ISAC in the past 4 years. The success of ISAC, we believe our success, by far would not have been possible without you, as ISAC continues to work, or hopefully continues to work and aspire to develop and promote the social scientific study of Asian Catholics. We also continue to challenge ourselves how academic endeavor, especially the social scientific study of religion or Catholicism or Asian Catholics, could shape larger public conversations in terms of how we communicate social science, in this case, religion, to the larger public. And at the same time, so it's not a one-way thing, at the same time, what is the public reception to the academic work? Today, we have four esteemed scholars who will help us examine and understand the intricate relations between the academia and the public sphere from different perspectives and different disciplines. Each speaker will have 10 to 15 minutes to present their insights. Then we will have a question and answer sessions after four presentations. I'm sure you have all your burning questions, so we will have time to do that. To facilitate today's exciting discussion, I will serve as the moderator for today. I am Bubbles Beverly Asor, a sociologist of migration and religion at De La Salle University, Manila, Philippines, and one of the four coordinators of ISAC, together with Michelle Chambon, Bernardo Brown, who they are both here today, and James Panaya. Without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Heidi A. Campbell, a professor of communication, an affiliate faculty in religious studies, and a presidential impact fellow at Texas A&M University. She's also director of the Network for New Media, Religion, and Digital Culture Studies, and a founder of the study of digital religion. Her award-winning research focuses on the intersection of technology, religion, digital culture, and Jewish, Muslim, and Christian media negotiations. She's the author of over 100 articles and a dozen books. If you're interested, her works include When Religion Meets New Media and Digital Creatives and a Rethinking Religious Authority. She has been quoted in news outlets such as the Houston Chronicle, USA Today, The Guardian, Wall Street Journal, and on the BBC. Without further ado, let us give a virtual applause to Heidi.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. I feel quite honored and maybe also a little out of place, because I'm new to the network, but also because I've had a kind of different journey than maybe some of the other speakers today into the world of Catholicism and the media. So I want to kind of give a little bit of kind of my backstory of how I got into kind of studying Catholicism and Catholic Church and the media, as well as talk a couple of moments that kind of really informed kind of my own kind of thinking and theology of communication, and then offer kind of three bits of reflection, on this theme of kind of being an academic in context of kind of doing this kind of work, especially with my specialty looking at kind of digital media, religion, and church culture. So I was first introduced to kind of Catholicism and the media as an area of scholarship through the work of Paul Sukup. When I was doing a master's in 1997 at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, the first book we had to read in my first graduate studies class was by Father Sukup. And it was kind of a project he had done where he had kind of basically did a large-scale lit review to kind of just map what is being done in the area of theology and media and thinking about communication and the church. And that book kind of led to the year the next year, my project, I got hold of his then hot off the press book, Media, Religion, and Catholicism. And that again was another seminar book in my PhD work. And so through the kind of reading, I began to kind of see and become really impressed with just the work that's been done in the Catholic tradition and the Catholic theological space about thinking deeply about the theological implications of communication, of what's framed as kind of social communication. So the idea of kind of ethical responsibility and communal forming of ideas and faith identities through kind of the production of media. And so through that kind of one of the important kind of milestones for me in my kind of academic career was in 1999. Some of you may know the work of Stuart Hoover, who's been foundational in the broad study of media, religion, and culture. But through his network, there was a large conference put together at the University of Edinburgh where I was doing my PhD work. And it was that first that conference in 1999 where I for the first time actually got to meet Paul Sukup and have a cup of tea and talk about his work. And I had several fangirl moments, but I was really challenged by some of his own thinking and writing in trying to bring together media ecology and looking at kind of communication, media as creating an environment, and how do we kind of think theologically about that kind of space. That conference was also foundational in my kind of own kind of intellectual development, because I also got to meet Bob White, who is some of you may know, spent many years at the Gregorian training whole generations of priests, not just to kind of in their pastoral work, but really to kind of think how they could use media, how they could think about media, and how they could teach their congregations about media. And then I also got to meet Franz Joseph Eilers, again, someone who I'd read numerous articles in my studies, but to be able to talk with him, especially about, I remember debating with him about Communio et Progressio and how that might apply to the area of the internet. This was before 2002, when the church and the internet and ethics in the internet were produced under the papacy of Pope John Paul II. So because of those kind of foundational interactions, starting in my career in the 2000s, I always included a unit in my classes where I studied media and religion and taught my students. We would look at Catholicism, and especially as a kind of a tradition that has developed some really uh, in-depth and important theological thinking about media in the contemporary age, and created, through Communia Progressio and other documents that have come after that, through the work of the Pontifical Council for Social Communication, really giving an important kind of context and a growing conversation, and not just an isolated, but a kind of a communal conversation around theology and technology. Um, Another important moment for me also was in the 2010s. Paul Sukup was asked to bring together a group of communication scholars that were studying communication, theology, and the church at Santa Clara University. And it was supposed to be kind of a working group slash think tank. And it was a small invitation only conference, but it brought together, key voices, scholars from around the U.S. and around the world. And it was there that I got to meet people like, then Archbishop Celli, who was the head of the Pontifical Council of Social Communication, then Monsignor Paul Tai, and Anthony Spadaro, all who became really important voices in kind of looking at how do we kind of think about, especially the era of social media and digital technology, and kind of what is our responsibility, not just ethically, but in terms of kind of speaking, truth with love, and kind of being critical, but also embracing digital technology. And then kind of over the course of my work, I started writing in around the 2010s about the Catholic Church and media in different contexts, doing some theological work and some kind of sociology of technology work in my writing. It's been featured big in several of my books, like When Religion Comes to Media, and I've talked a lot about the Catholic Church in my most recent book, Digital Creatives and Rethinking Religious Authority in a Digital Age, and again, benefiting so much from these conversations that I've had. And then most recently, I've been able since 2019 to interact with the now Dicastery of Communication, and talking, being part of several seminars, giving, kind of teaching some classes and workshops, as well as kind of being part of some consultant groups that have thought through several different papers and several different statements that have gone on to Pope Francis, and now on to Pope Leo, about looking at these new eras and new generation of media. So I think that kind of provides an important context of kind of my journey in my learning about religion and media, especially from a Catholic perspective. And it's something, I am a Protestant. And so, coming to this kind of tradition has been, again, very challenging. And also, when I do now a lot of consulting work with other religious communities, anything from the Brethren and the Mennonites to, Pentecostal and charismatic groups. And I always go back to Communia Progressio as the foundational document. And I say, where do you want to know how to do good theology? Here's a good example of a starting point. But along that journey, in this kind of theme that we're looking at about what it means to be an academic in relation to the church and in the relationship of the work of public scholarship, I just have kind of three brief themes I want to raise. And so the first one is that, I've kind of learned over the last several decades that is the important role of academics as religious interpreters, especially for the public. I think, in an age where we see in some parts of the world growing secularization and kind of, and maybe even a rebounding of secularization in some places, that academics play a very important role, not just kind of explaining church history or kind of certain ideas to a non-Catholic and a public audience, but also kind of making the case of why that paying attention to religion and the kind of work, the thinking, and the contributions of the Catholic Church are worthy of attention and are important, especially in this digital age. I think, it's important for academics to be able to kind of, can make this kind of a case for why Catholic thinking, Catholic theological work all has something to offer the contemporary society more broadly, and especially when it has such a rich historical tradition of theology to draw on in relation to social communications. In many ways, there's nothing new under the sun, and so because we have 100 years of great documents in theological thinking on the area of social communications, when we come to this age of AI, we can really kind of draw deeply from the wells of kind of wisdom that have been gone before us and in the church. A second thing I think that academics is important for them to do is I think academics kind of play this role of a contextual storyteller, and that is for the church. Sometimes I find when I work with kind of clergy or I work with kind of religious leaders that I have to kind of explain what the work of academics is, and it's not to be an apologeticist. It's not to be kind of an evangelist, but it is to be a storyteller to basically kind of how to tell your story in a way that is understood and perceived, and also showing that even when your story is critiqued by broader culture, that's not always a bad thing. And I believe that academics can do a really good job of kind of helping the church kind of contextualize their own actions and thinking in light of kind of contemporary history and contemporary trends and movements. And so oftentimes it's kind of that storytelling is like is talking to the church and saying, this is the moment we're in. This is where you where your story, where your work, where your uh, theological thinking can have a platform. And so kind of trying to build a space or encourage the building of a space for public understanding about Catholicism by kind of helping the church oftentimes communicate in more clear ways and contextualizing that as well. And I think the third thing that academics, why academics play a important role in this kind of shaping the public conversation about Catholicism is that as an academic, I think we can enact what some scholars have called prophetic witness in a unique way. Because we stand oftentimes between and I kid sometimes that sometimes I have put on a theological hat and as a theologian, other times a media scholar, but most of the time I feel like I step in between those two worlds, and that allows me to kind of speak basically the truth about this is where culture is in positive and negative ways, and also this is where the church basically the strengths it brings, but also maybe some of the weaknesses, also some of the PR challenges that it has, and being able to kind of illuminate for society in ways that the positives and the negatives of the discourse in many ways, and oftentimes that I feel, especially as someone who's an academic and someone who's not from the Catholic Church and the Catholic tradition, I can say some of the things in ways that other people, maybe community insiders or church members, wouldn't feel comfortable saying. I try to do that with grace and wisdom, but I feel that it's sometimes that the academic prophetic witness is important to kind of show both society and the church where kind of the holes are, and kind of then try to bring those two closer together through our academic work and scholarship. And so that's, I think, where I will leave what my contribution is my kind of in my career and in my engagement as a public scholar and as a scholar of media, religion, and culture.
Thank you very much, Heidi, for being so in time and giving us these very clear roles and that academics could play that perhaps academics themselves may not know that they're doing it, and also for the audience, the public, to understand what exactly academics are doing, especially in terms of communicating religion and communicating what we do as researchers. So, without further ado, we are now going to listen to the next speaker. Our next speaker is Anthony Leduc, SVD. He's a missionary priest in the Society of the Divine Word. He is currently an assistant professor and executive director of the Asian Research Center for Religion and Social Communication at St. John's University, Thailand. He also teaches in the Faculty of Moral Theology at Sangtham College, Thailand. His primary research focuses on religious environmental ethics, particularly the relationship between faith, traditions, ecological responsibility, and moral action. His His most recent publication, very fresh from the press, 2025, is titled Buddhist Environmental Humanism Doing Good for Self and Others, for those who are interested in Anthony's book. Without further ado, let us now listen to Anthony. Please let us give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much, Bubbles. Good evening. I'm actually in Melbourne this morning, and thus the sweater. And I thank you, Heidi, for that input. I actually resonated very much, and I think some of what I'm about to say uh, kind of goes along with what you have just said. So I just get into it. I think today, when we encounter Catholicism in the public square, it's oftentimes, headlines, debates, and a lot of times a lot of heated exchanges in social media. And I think the recent example, is the comments that the single Madonna made in regards to Pope Leo's sentiments regarding how he felt about the role of the gospel and his role in solving the world's problems. And what rarely gets noticed, however, is I think the deeper work of academics like ourselves and scholars and researchers who are, I think, quietly but also very powerfully shaping how Catholicism is being understood and also discussed. And so my aim this evening is just to give a little bit of an input on how academics can shape public conversation about Catholicism. And this basically comes from my own context as a priest, but also as an academic. So, and I'll reflect on some of the themes that will resonate with what Heidi just said, but also some others that are, I think, my contribution this evening. So, the first thing I think, what is the role of academics is basically to have that prophetic voices. And in the Judeo-Christian tradition, a prophet wasn't a fortune teller, but someone who spoke truth with urgency and often in uncomfortable ways. They reminded people of justice and compassion and faithfulness. Amos, for example, demanded that justice roll down like waters. Isaiah insisted that worship must go hand in hand with defending the orphan and the widow. And so today, academics play, I think, a similar role in the public conversation. Catholic scholars can bring forward uncomfortable truths that society would maybe rather avoid. Systemic injustice, economic inequality, environmental destruction. But unlike politicians or activists, academics do this with the grounding of research and theological depth, and of course, Catholic social teaching. Um, a second role, I think, is academics as faithful, creative interpreters. As Heidi said, we are also interpreters. So, as Catholic scholars, but we are first of all disciples, and our work must be anchored in Christ, in the teachings of the Church, and in our own faith life. And so, if we simply repeat doctrine without imagination, we will fail to reach contemporary audiences. So Pope Francis, for example, has encouraged communicators to adopt styles that are open and creative and never glamorizing evil, but always pointing toward solutions. And for academics, that means, I think, finding ways to make Catholic thought speak to today's questions about technology, identity, mental health, as well as globalization. And creativity also means engaging with those on the margins. And we know that today, many groups, migrants, asylum seekers, or LGBTQ communities, many of them feel disconnected from the church. But Catholic academics, I think, can create bridges, entering those conversations with openness and compassion, and showing that Catholicism has something meaningful to contribute to these areas. So I think faithfulness ensures our integrity as academics, but creativity ensures our relevance, and both are essential in today's context. A third role is for academics to be contextual. I come from the Vietnamese background, and in Vietnamese, there's a saying, one rides a horse to admire the flowers, which implies that you see a lot, but understanding little and not in depth. And too often, I think public conversations about religions operate in this way. There are quick takes, surface level observations, and very little depth. And I think the Madonna take on Pope Leo's comments is a case in point. So Catholic academics, I think, can help slow things down, right? We can draw from our research and from the lived experience to contextualize Catholic teachings in ways that connect with real lives. Um, I live and teach in Thailand, and so I think of Buddhist monks in Thailand who walk barefoot through the villages and the market squares every morning to receive their alms. And I think this is very symbolic of being deeply rooted in the struggles and the everyday life of the people. And I think similarly, Catholic academics shouldn't just be, armchair or Google or ChatGPT scholars, but must keep their scholarship close to the ground, right? Engaging with communities, listening to their realities, and reflecting that in their work, in their teachings and writings. And so in today's world, being, I think, on the ground also means being present in digital spaces. And Heidi is an expert in this area, right? Many people live their lives online. They form friendships, they debate ideas, they wrestle with their faith, right? So academics can't ignore these spaces as too messy or too chaotic. And we need to meet people where they are, both in classrooms and in digital environments, and to guide the conversation in ways that are truthful and compassionate. I also see the academic's role as being as to inspire, and too often public conversations about Catholicism gets stuck in defending positions or arguing about rules. But Catholic academics can lift the conversation up higher. We can inspire people with a vision of hope, with glimpses of a new heaven and a new earth that Scripture promises. The late Protestant theologian Walter Brueggemann once wrote that true energy comes not from what we already possess, but from what is promised. And that's the task of the academic in the Catholic tradition, I think, to show that Catholic thought isn't just about the past, but what's possible in the future. And we think of Pope Francis' consistent witness, whether he's writing about ecology or choosing a simple car instead of a luxury motorcade. He communicates hope and possibility through both words and actions. And Catholic academics, I think, can do the same, inspiring students, readers, and also the broader public to see Catholicism not as a burden, but as a source of joy and transformation. Academics, I think, are also called to challenge. We live in what Pope Benedict called a, quote, dictatorship of relativism, where truth is often reduced to personal opinion. Public conversations are full of phrases like my truth and your truth, But Catholic academics, I think, must insist that truth is more than just subjective preference. And this doesn't mean being harsh or authoritarian. It means speaking with the moral clarity. As Nobel winner journalist Maria Ressa has urged, we need to name the idols of our day: consumerism, nationalism, digital manipulation, and offering Catholic teaching as a counter narrative. So this role, I think, is uncomfortable but necessary. And academics have the privilege of a platform, and with that comes the responsibility to challenge distortions, expose injustice, both and hold governments as well as corporations accountable. And finally, academics, I also concur with what Heidi said. We must also be witnesses. And for academics, this means that our personal integrity is itself a form of communication. The way we conduct research, the way we treat students, the way we use our own platforms, these actions, I think, speak as loudly as any lecture or book that we might publish. We know well, Pope Paul VI once observed that people listen more readily to witnesses than to teachers. And if they listen to teachers, it is because they're also witnesses. When we hear the word teacher, we often think about pastoral teachers like bishops and priests, but academics ourselves are also teachers. We have many students. So we also need to have our actions that go along with the things that we teach. And so that should challenge all of us. Our work will shape public conversation, not just by what we say, but by who we are. So, in short, Catholic academics, we're not just thinkers, we are communicators, we're bridge builders, and we're also witnesses. And our vocation isn't only to interpret Catholicism, but to help society see how Catholicism can contribute to a more humane, just, and hopeful world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for that very interesting and fascinating presentation. It gives us the ideas about opportunities and constraints of academics when it comes to researching Catholicism, and not just researching, but also communicating our research to shape public sphere at the level of discourse. But more importantly, also equally important is for practice. From the perspective of someone working both in the academia and the theology and the Catholic Church, we will now move to the perspective of a journalist. We will now go to our third presenter. Our third presenter is Andrea Gagliarducci. I hope I'm not mispronouncing that. He works for the EWTN Group as a Vatican analyst for the Catholic News Agency and is a Vatican correspondent for ACI Stampa. He has collaborated with the newspapers La Sicilia, Il Tempo, and Il Fatto Quotidiano, and was one of the authors of the online religious information portal Chorazym.org, Korazym.org. We will put that in the chat box for those who are interested in it. He manages the English language blog www.mondayvatican.com and the Italian language blog Vatican Reporting. He is a regular contributor at Il Messaggero, Il Foglio, Brussels Signal, and Alpha E Omega. Without further ado, let us all welcome and listen to Andrea.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. There have been a lot of, how can I say, there was a lot of ideas that came out from the previous two presentations. I'm just a journalist, although I work in the academia. I'm earning a PhD in the Budapest University in Pázmány-Péter, and I did many things working for the church, also as an advisor for communication in some panels that have come confidential because of my job, obviously. So my presentation today will be about three main topics that I think are important. The first is the journalism in a dead end, which means is going the Catholic journalism being always less important in this world, in this particular landscape. The second, if journalism and academia can collide or cannot collide in fostering ideas and information that can be spread. And third is, what can we do? Because that's a big problem. First of all, I will say this. By my own experience, journalism is not at an end. It's just a different situation. And I will explain you why. Before, to be a journalist, that means to spread information, you needed a media. You needed a place where you could work and spread the media. It was very hard to be able to spread information autonomously. You need a newspaper, you need a hard thing that was owned by someone, so you need to be hired. Now, information is everywhere. You know, you can deliver an information even if you are around, you go on X and you post an X account on your X account, and that's always a news. Does this make you a journalist? There is a general idea that journalist is everybody who gives the news, but that's not true. The journalist is not the one who gives the news. The journalist is the one who's able to read the news and explain them to people. The journalist, as the guy to call, is a mediator between the news, between what happens and what you see in the world. If we don't start having this perspective, we lose journalism. So most of the big issues about journalism today are about the fact that we're misinterpreting journalism as just delivering news. Everybody can deliver a news. That's not an issue. And I will tell you more. Everybody can write an article. We have a lot of school of journalism all across the world. I went to many, I checked the programs. Mostly they explain the technique. The technique of journalism is something you can learn very easily. Talent is a different thing. You know, there are people who write better, people who write less better, but you know, that's talent. But the technique, so put the news on the top and have a good regular thing after, that's something you can learn. So it's not about that. Journalism is about how you can be a mediator. Being a mediator is the key today. And being a mediator is the key because when you are a mediator, you are different, but you are in a niche. You're not mainstream. I think we have to drop the idea of the mainstream journalism. I think we have to drop the idea to be reachable for everyone. Everything is reachable everywhere, and so it's not reachable anymore because, you know, there is so much information that you have to choose, and once you choose, you stick to that information. So you need to have faithful readers and or audience, and in some ways, just stick with them. Because that's your audience. Then you can grow, but you will not grow that much. The future will be this. The future will be that we will have always more specialized situations when we can work. That does not mean that we're in a bubble. We should not be in a bubble. We generally, as Catholic, are in a bubble because we always speak to each other. I go to many conferences and it's always the same people, which I like because we became friends in many years, but still we need a new generation. And that's when we come to the second point, academia. Academia is what you need to foster the new generation, but as long as there is not an alliance between the information and the academia, you cannot spread a new generation. If academia is detached from reality, academia does not help the new generation. If reality doesn't care about academia, reality cannot develop anything. And that's part of the reason why I'm earning a PhD. I'm earning a PhD because I really think that at one point, once you want to explain things to people, you need to go and get the people since they are very young. You get them when they're 20, when they're 21, you teach them how to do things and you give them a job, because that's the other issue. We always think that they don't need job, they need to work. But you professionalize them, and you professionalize them with the twofold situation, academia and information. Why that? Because of the reason I was telling before. Since you have this developing of information and this spread of information that is everywhere, and since that the quality of information is crucial, if you don't have a real academic formation in the deep sense of the word, not in the sense of the graduation, a lot of people have diplomas, doesn't mean that they were formed. But if you don't have that, you don't make a difference. You're not able to go deep when you write, you're not able to go deep when you study, you're not able to go deep when you see a news. I do Vatican mostly, and that's my general specialty, and I do Vatican diplomacy. It's been 20 years that I work in this field. After 20 years, what I figured is that there is no news in what we're doing. There is no scoop, because there is a huge continuity in 2 millennia of history of the church. In these 2 millennia, if there is continuity, there is nothing totally new. There is something that happened before, perhaps nuanced differently. But if you present it as a news without giving the context, without giving the background, you're not doing a good service. And this is what we do. We give a service. Generally, journalism is considered the fourth power. I really disagree with that. You cannot be a power, because if you're a power, you get into politics. If you get into politics, you're not neutral. You need to be neutral, which does not mean that you can be totally objective. That's a fake thing. You know, nobody's totally objective. There is always a subjectivity in what we do. There is always a point of view in what we do. And the most honest thing to do is to say that you have a subjective point of view, that you have a particular background, but you go deep and you explain why you see things that way. You don't have to tell the audience what they have to think. This is the general idea. You explain the audience what they have to think, but you let the audience think. It's a huge, huge difference, although in a very, very small words. So academia is very important for that. And that's why I'm working with academia. That's why I'm trying to study. That's why I'm trying to understand academia and academia language. The real issue is that we have also this idea that academia need to speak to the journalists in a way that journalists can find the news. That's something I disagree with as well. And this is something I tell also when I consult the bishops in many issues like communication. It's not that they need to be newsworthy when they speak, because that way it becomes too simplistic. A bishop is a bishop, and speak as a bishop. A professor is a professor, and speak as a professor. A journalist is a journalist, and speak as a journalist. It is the journalist who needs to be good enough to understand what a bishop, a professor says, and explain it in good terms without being too simplistic. So we're going not just in professional relationship, but we need a very much more human relationship in this moment. You need to find people you trust. You need to talk to people you trust. This is what happens in academia. Generally, there are circle of professors that speak to each other because they trust each other, they trust their judgment, they trust their issues. This is what academia should do with journalists and vice versa. Journalism must not be perceived as part of a media, but must be perceived individually with their capacity. Because if journalist is good enough, he's able also to shape the media that way. My general idea is that not only journalism is not at the dead end, but not even academia is at the dead end. We speak about theology, we speak about social issues, and there is a lot of saying today in this world that these are useless things because they're not pragmatic, but that's not true. This is the basis of what you think. This is the basis of how you shape the world. Even pragmatic things needs a philosophy behind, because otherwise you don't have a vision, you go nowhere. When you write something, if you don't have a vision, the article, the paper, the essay is poor. And when it's poor, it gives nothing to people. So the real issue is that we're not lost if we look for deepness. If we go in depth with things, we're lost if we think pragmatically, if we think technically. And that's the big issue, the big clash we have now between, it's just like continental philosophy and the European philosophy in somehow. But without that kind of depth, you cannot go anywhere. Journalism will save itself if it starts going in depth with things. They will tell you that there is no audience for that. I can tell you it's not true. And I will give you an example, a final one. I generally do very long articles, never less than 2-3 pages. Internet helps you to do that because you don't have a space, you don't have a paper that you have to fit in. I do that because I like to give as much as background as I can, because I think that when people read what I write, they don't have to feel the need that they need to read something else. They need all the information there so they can make an idea. And everybody tells me that this thing shouldn't work, that people don't read. Well, we see the data, we see the figures. Website is easy because you can see the figures. And generally, the longer pieces are the most read, because people perhaps does not read all the piece in that moment, but they get back to the piece many times. And if there is something new and they want a connection, they go back to that piece. So again, it's a niche. Obviously, it's an audience that is very specialized, but all the audiences will be specialized. The non-specialized audience is mostly gossip, and we don't do gossip mostly. So, or, star news. So that's why there is hope, and I see a lot of hope in young people. When I do seminars in universities, last time there were 20-year-old guys that did very pretty fine job on pontifical diplomacy. I just gave them 4 papers to read, and they did everything by themselves at 20 with no formation, with no degree. So there is hope. So that's why I'm very optimistic, despite anything, despite all the situations. And I really think that this kind of alliance we're building now can be helpful for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for that very illuminating clarification and delineation of what academics' role is. Sometimes we forget what our role is and what the role of journalist is, and how these two roles could overlap, collide, and have alliance, as you rightfully mentioned. And I'm sure our audience will have a lot of questions later. Our last speaker is, we don't need a lot of description, but for those who may not know, Michel Chambon has a PhD in anthropology from Boston University. He's a French Catholic theologian and a cultural anthropologist interested in Christianity in Asia. He has published research on the agents of Christian buildings, Chinese Pentecostalism, and Chinese Catholic nuns. His most recent book, titled Making Christ Present in China, Actor Network Theory and the Anthropology of Christianity, examines the 5 Christian denominations of Nanping, it's a Fujian province, to question the ways of social science and how social science could theorize the unity and diversity of Christianity. He's the founder and one of the coordinators of the Initiative for the Study of Asian Catholics, ISAC, and his current research projects examine materialization of Christianity within Taiwanese households, as well as the expansion of the sovereign military order of Malta across the Asia-Pacific region. Let us all welcome Michelle for the last presentation.
Can you hear me?
Now we can. Now we do.
But I can see that my PowerPoint doesn't work. I'm sorry about that. Thank you very much, Bubbles, for the introduction. I knew I would be the last speaker, so I thought that having some visuals may help. If that doesn't work, I will just read my paper. Sorry about that. So last week, the first long interview with Pope Leo was published, and among the topics he touched on was the church relationship with China. It's a topic that really regularly grabs headlines and generates a lot of comments, and in some sense it sells. But it's also a topic with many layers and global significance. Of course, it concerns the well-being of Catholics in China, including Hong Kong. But it also raises questions about the ways we understand post-Vatican and its real ability to engage with the People's Republic of China, outside of foreign interference, to not name the Americans here. So, oh, I see my PowerPoint finally. Sorry about that. Okay. So let me start with a bit of personal background. 20 years ago, as a young French seminarian, I was sent to Hong Kong to serve the local French-speaking Catholic community. The goal of my bishop was to expose me to another culture and help me understand the universality of the church. I didn't speak English at that time, but I was eager to live with local Catholics and learn from them. Gradually, I also discovered the lives of missionaries such as the French MEP, Italian PME, American Marinos, and I also learned Cantonese. Soon I began traveling to mainland China, and in my last and third year, I spent 1 week every month volunteering in Guangzhou. That experience showed me that the church in China wasn't easily divided into good versus evil, black versus white, but everything operated in shades of gray. In 2008, 2 years after my return to France, I chose not to become a priest, but I still felt called to serve the church professionally, and I decided to do it through academia. I decided to focus on Christianity in the Chinese world, not because of any romantic vision of Asia, but because of the people I knew there. Therefore, since 2009, I've returned to China almost every year, and I've lived for research in both Taiwan and Fujian. In my research, I try to approach Chinese Catholics and Christians as ordinary people, not as exotic, oppressed figures, but as brothers and sisters in humanity. In 2014, during my doctoral studies in the US, I gave a talk in France about the Catholic Church in China. I was struck by how little interest the audience had in the everyday lives of Chinese Catholics. They were much more interested in Chinese politics. One question still stands out. How do Chinese Catholics deal with contraception under the one-child policy? I found that question a bit strange and even problematic, especially when one knows how Catholics around the world deal with contraceptions under the no contraception policy of some church leaders. Anyhow, After that talk, I wrote one of my first public article in French media. Who is persecuting the church in China? And in that article, I argue that our way of talking about Chinese Catholics often ends up distorting and even harming them. Rather than rushing to politicize everything, we Christians should listen and understand their realities. And to my surprise, a response article came out one day after my article. It was anonymous, titled by an observer of the church in China. Of course, I recognize the author, an MEP priest that I knew very well, who insisted in his article that the sole persecutor of the church in China was the government. This event reminded me of something Cardinal Zen, Joseph Zen of Hong Kong, once shared during a private meeting. He was explaining that in a meeting in the Vatican, when he asked a senior cardinal to back up his claim about the church in China, the answer was, it's confidential. I cannot tell you who told me. So then the cardinals end up swapping dramatic but unverifiable stories, making the church unable to reach a clear understanding of the situation. So it's not only the Beijing-Vatican relationships which needs to be normalized. It's also our ways to gather information and to talk about the church in China, which needs to be normalized. So, and that's where I see the role of scholars. We're here to provide, with grace and wisdom, as Heidi was said, grounded, detailed, and depoliticized perspectives. Through my academic service, I try to normalize how we talk about Chinese Catholics, not as pure victims or mere tools of a political narrative, but as real people with real faith and real challenges. So since 2014, I've published articles on various topics related to Christianity in China. My goal is to de-exoticize the conversation, to move beyond headlines and anti-communist stereotypes, and to stop reducing Chinese Christianity to a proxy issue in Sino-Western tensions. It takes time to make oneself available to journalists and media, to write my own commentaries, to track down most recent news and information, and to contextualize them. It does take time also to conduct fieldwork research and public scientific papers about Chinese Catholic nuns, the role of Black Africans Catholic in China, the significance of Christian dance in Chinese public squares, or on the production of the blood of Christ among inside Christian churches. It takes time to deal with the tensions between in-depth and accessible informations and papers, short-term and long-term scopes. Clearly, this academic service can take many forms, but it's a long-term service to Catholics in China, to the church as a whole, and to the general public. And sometimes it can also turn risky. One example. On the 2nd of April 2020, so quite at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, Cardinal Charles Bo, the Archbishop of Rangoon and then president of the Federation of Asian Bishops' Conferences, FABC, issued a press article blaming the Chinese Communist Party entirely for the COVID-19 pandemic and even demanding financial compensations. China was the culprit. At a time of widespread fear, this was a serious statement from a major church figure. And no one publicly criticized it. But I was contacted by Chinese priests and nuns who were upset, and even by Chinese officials asking if this was an official Vatican position, because of course it was highly shared and publicized around different media circles all around the world. Of course, this wasn't a Vatican position. And I encourage my Catholic contacts in China to write a response. But understandably, none of them wanted to publicly oppose one of the highest cardinals in Asia. So after thinking about it for 2 weeks, I published a public response myself. carefully worded, and I released it through UCA News. I told the news agency to not change a single word of my text. Yet I forgot to tell them to not change the title. And they did, making it much more eye-catching, as you can see here. So soon after, 2 days after that, Cardinal Joseph Zen of Hong Kong publicly responded to my article, blaming the French theologian for being totally naive and being a poor theologian. After that, the story exploded in American conservative media and highlighting how 2 Asian cardinals were blaming China for COVID-19. So suddenly my name were in all kind of media circles and publicized in the US, when I was indeed myself in the US and on the job market. Of course, this is not directly related, but the following months, so from 2020 to 2021, I found myself without a job. Anyway, so I've spared you the details of this period. What is interesting for us tonight is that 3 years later, in August 2023, I met a senior Vatican official who told me privately that on behalf of the Secretary of State, he wanted to thank me for my response to Cardinal Bo. And that was the only confirmation from church official that I've received that I was not entirely wrong about this episode. And it mattered. The statement of Cardinal Churchbull was not up to the church mission and far from it. So why do I tell this story? Because it shows how scholars, precisely because we are not necessarily members of the clergy, can sometimes say what others cannot. It's not always comfortable or safe, but academic voices can support the church in ways that even cardinals sometimes cannot. In a synodal church, academics offer an alternative voice, a voice that is equally professional and one that helps us listen to one another and speak out, even when some church leaders make unfortunate statements. So in conclusion, the case of public conversations about Chinese Catholicism shows how scholarly work can meaningfully contribute to the church's efforts to better understand, engage with, and normalize its presence in complex regions of the world. It's a slow process marked by suspicions, tensions, and hesitations, but one that remains essential. It may upset some people, even some church leaders, but it also participates in the synodal transformation of the church. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for giving us an illustration of real life on the ground experience of how to balance academia and the public sphere. And this is speaking to what Heidi and Anthony and Andrea have already discussed about this alternative voice by discussing and presenting things that usually are unpopular causes and very uncomfortable, but someone has to say it. So the academics are in that right and good best position. So having said that, we are now open to your burning questions, comments, and I'm sure you have a lot. And we are packed today with around 50 people in our audience. So please feel free to share your thoughts and comments and questions in the chat box, or you can also virtually raise your hand and speak and provide us your insights and questions to our speakers. And we already have a few requests and comments in the chat box, like requesting for the titles of the books. So I already provided that. So any questions from our audience? Do we have? We're sharing our books in the chat box. So any questions so far?
I will have a question for my colleagues.
Yes, please. Not very common to coming from this
waiting for people to get out of
while
their
waiting.
we can discuss among us. I think one thing we haven't discussed and that would be interesting to compare is the difference it makes to deal with the Catholic Church. that is a gigantic organization. If we think about other Christian denominations or even other religions where there is not necessarily such a centralized institution, where in our case, so it's not just academics and the public media, but it's also it's a triangle with at least an institution producing huge narratives. So I don't know whether we would like to elaborate on that. It's not just Christianity at large, so it's not just shaping public conversation about Christianity, but it's about Catholicism, and therefore we're dealing with an institutions, and that is, complex with all kind of under institutions producing their narratives and having their.
Anyone can jump in from Heidi, Anthony, or Andrea.
Or to make it short, which difference it makes to have a pope or to have the Vatican in this kind of public conversation?
How to deal with a Catholic Church, which has quite a particularity.
I can respond if you want, if there is not anybody else.
Yes, Andrea, then Heidi. Yes, please,
Okay,
Andrea.
sorry. You want to go first, Heidi? Sorry, I didn't.
No, go ahead, Andrea.
So just to say that I cover the Vatican and I cover the Holy See. And it might seem that it's very specific, although Catholic world is huge. But the real issue is that when you have an institution like the Catholic Church, you have an institution like the Holy See, you have a very global institution that has many, many issues in it. And that's the reason why I started covering the Holy See, and that's the reason why I liked it, because everybody can think that it's very specific, but just because they see it just in terms of religion. But history tells us that the Catholic faith was the only religion that was able to institutionalize in a way to help the people. Because that's the reason why we have a diplomacy. That's the reason why we have a state in some sense. It's a state because you need an independence. All these things have been neglected from the generation because nobody speaks about them anymore. And because it seems that the Catholic Church must be just the priests, the poor, the migrants, or whatsoever, which is true. It is that, but it's not just that. It's an institution. And that makes the huge difference between the Catholic Church and the other Christian denominations that I cover. I cover all the Christian denominations. I'm very much interested in the ecumenical dialogue because ecumenical dialogue is at the basis. For example, I'm based in Europe and I'm very interested in how Christianity shaped Europe, because Europe may not be Catholic, but it's certainly Christian by culture and by all the development of the European states. But by the way, there is no other institution like the Catholic Church. And that's the strength of the Catholic Church. And that's also the weakness of the Catholic Church when you deal with media, because nobody likes to deal with an institution. You don't like to deal with states. You don't like to deal with Holy See. It's easier to speak badly about an institution, and it's better to speak well about pastors. Let's say that. So that's the big difference I can see in my personal experience.
Thank you, Andrea. Heidi, would you like to follow on that?
Yeah, I think, just as as Andrea stated, the Vatican is its own kind of state, as it were. And I kind of like to think of, the different, used to be councils, and now, the dicasteries are like little cities. And so like some cities are easier to get into and they're more friendly. Some of them are maybe harder to get into, but once you're there, they're welcoming and whatnot. And so I know for me personally, as an academic, I spent a whole decade building relationships just so I could get access to the people that I wanted to for my research in the then Pontifical Council for Social Communication. And I found them to be a very kind of welcoming and warm group. But I know that again, other scholars who work with other groups, it's a very different experience. And so I think that's one, again, the positive things, from my perspective, when Pope Francis tried to more, centralize things and kind of bring things together, it's made it so much easier, at least for me, to do kind of communication and research work now that's the dicastery of communication. But I think it's, again, it depends, like, if you're in the world of theology, it's a different kind of relationship that you're going to have versus if you're kind of looking at, the Council of Evangelization or Council, of culture or whatnot. So.
Thank you, Heidi. May I now call in Chidor, who raised his hand first? Chidor, please.
Oh, thank you very much, Bubbles. And thank you for all the presenters. It was very useful, very It provides a lot of new insights about how to understand public perception and the role of Catholicism in shaping public perceptions. The issue I want to raise is, especially in the Asian region, with the exception of one or two countries, including your own bubbles, Catholicism is not a kind of majority religion or majoritarian religion. It's a minority religion. Particularly, this is the case in my country and also in Thailand. I think that Anthony spoke about. So my question to all of you is, what are the kind of uh, opportunities and challenges for Catholicism in shaping public opinion, particularly in countries where Catholics form a very small minority. Uh, so, in my view, I don't see them as challenges only. There may be some opportunities also for being a minority. For instance, in my country, Sri Lanka, only Catholic priests have actually talked about caste publicly because caste is a kind of silent topic. People think it's a non-issue, but some Catholic priests have come forward and address it in public. So I want to get views from the presenters as well in regard to this question.
Thank you, Tudor. So may I now ask our four presenters how to respond to Tudor's question?
Quick thought. I'm from a French background. I'm sorry, Anthony. I'm very sorry. Where in France, the church was a majority and therefore easily blamed for every social problem or everything wrong in our culture. So I feel that in Asia, instead of playing the game of the poor minority, persecuted, it's also a chance to be a minority because we can put ourselves in the position of being the alternative option, questioning all the problems of the country, saying, look, like by a reverse situation of what I've seen in France, because I see often in Asia that we highlight the difficult conditions of the Catholics, but not enough the opportunities that this minority situation creates. That's my view. Sorry, Anthony.
Thank you, Michelle. Anthony, please.
Yeah, I thank you. I also see opportunities. Well, for me, as somebody who works primarily in a Buddhist country and who works primarily in interreligious context, I think this is where I find the role of the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church in the way our teachings and the way our outlook is that we intentionally carry out interfaith, interreligious dialogue, and that's a very intentional, and some would say the only way to do mission is through dialogue, and interreligious dialogue is that way in the Asian context. So how we impact public perception in these contexts where the Catholic Church is a very tiny minority is to use that avenue of interreligious dialogue with our Buddhist brothers and sisters, with our Muslim brothers and sisters. And through our conversations and dialogue with these individuals from various faith traditions, then we can impact the way not only how Catholicism is perceived in the society, but also how various issues are understood when we interject that Catholic perspective into it.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Heidi and Andrea, would you like to answer Tudor's, or you would go for the next batch of questions that are waiting? Let me just maybe ask a question from the chat box. This is a very philosophical question from Jean-Carl Nathaniel Supan. He's a former seminarian. He's interested in how Saints Augustine and Thomas Christianize the Greeks and other philosophers. Is there a similar way of doing that in your work as academics, like critically engaging with critiques from other fields of study or even within our own field? Okay, that's I think difficult question. Who would like to ask that
It's a
question?
question for Anthony, I think.
Yes, I was just about to say that.
Not so much my field actually. I might defer that to somebody else, and if I do, I probably wouldn't have enough time to reflect on that. I would probably need a lot more time to reflect on that.
Yes, we can leave this out. Perhaps John Carl could email us if he wants to have this very interesting conversation. We have a long comment question from Mike. I think he's asking about how, I'll just summarize it, what design principles or digital interventions might transform social media platforms from mere documentation tools into a very strategic or genuine sites of religio-cultural formation, especially from the context of indigenous youth who find their traditional wisdom and participation in community living boring or irrelevant. And I think it resonates to other groups at the moment where we think that religion could be boring or irrelevant, or indigenous knowledge could be boring or irrelevant.
I can jump in here. Yeah. I mean, I don't really have an answer to this, but one thing I can say is that, I think that, Pope Francis and now Pope Leo, are really being intentional in talking about the kind of cultivation of kind of digital spaces and, digital missionaries. And I was really kind of impressed with the meeting that they had in July, bringing together a lot of anywhere from Catholic influencers to kind of religious media Catholic media educators. And I think that the church is really being intentional, not just of kind of recognizing the work that people have already done, but realizing that they need to learn from the kind of technological experts, but maybe some of the technological experts also need to learn from the church about kind of, how to communicate not just effectively, but communicate, kind of authentically and, with kind of maybe accountability in some ways. But I think, a couple of things that really came out of that event, and there's some documents that are going to be kind of coming out, I think, in the next few months, is that, the need for the church to kind of be more deliberate in kind of thinking about how do we design technologies, how do we prepare not just priests with technological skills, but kind of work with kind of young people and saying, this is the kind of cultural platform and space that you are drawn to. How do we kind of cultivate that, build that? So I'm hoping that what we see in July is opening up a new era of conversation and kind of collaboration, and that is more kind of not just user-centered, but kind of church-centered communication.
Thank you very much, Heidi. Anyone else would
Yeah.
like to?
I can also jump in.
Yes, please.
Yeah, actually, one of my interest is, in the use of traditional knowledge and traditional wisdom to apply to the present ecological crisis. And we understand that all around the world, many traditional societies have wisdom and knowledge that are very useful to addressing the present day crisis. So and Pope Francis has also recognized the value of traditional knowledge in Laudato Si with respect to the environmental problem and to care for our common home. So traditional knowledge and community living is not at all boring, and it's actually very useful and actually very important for today's context. So I think what is important then is for academics to highlight, and also Catholic academics to highlight this value, and those who are in the field of digital communication, ITC, can also try to promote this kind of knowledge through their digital platforms, so that then people who come from these contexts will not feel that their wisdom and their knowledge is boring, but in fact, there is a place and also an opportunity to highlight and to promote this knowledge, not only among their own community, but to the entire world. So I think it's a great opportunity to really integrate between the traditional as well as the new media. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I think that's very well said, how academics could play as mediator and communicator and the bridge between this, and not just to a very small community, but to the larger public, especially in the academic field through journal articles and presentations and whatnot. I'll just string this question to Maria Jose Paez's question about what do you think for the speakers the most important to share with young people to encourage them to join and be part of initiatives? I think this is still part of the whole conversation. Uh, Andrea and Michelle, would you like to respond how young people could be encouraged to
Well,
join?
I'm really much, I really don't like the issue of saying that we have to involve young people in a general way, because it seems that, we're doing marketing and we want young people coming there. I can give you a big experience that I had. So 2005, I was still a kid, although working already. And I went to Cologne for the World Youth Day. And it was the first time there was the adoration at the vigil, because Benedict XVI wanted the adoration. We were totally surprised about that. Nobody was expecting that kind of adoration. Especially, we did not expect that Benedict XVI was going just to take the host, take the Eucharist, bless silently, and go away. Like he blessed and left. And we were all shocked. But it was one of the most powerful moments I had. What I want to say with that the more we think how to involve the young people, the more we don't go sometimes to the roots. And sometimes the roots are good enough for young people. We see now in Europe, there is a huge resurgence of the traditional masses or whatsoever. You see the pilgrimage between Paris and Chartres, 80,000 people this year, mostly young people. I really don't get why people go to traditional mass, because I was born after and I always had the Paul VI mass. I never liked that much the other mass. I went because I wanted to see, but never liked it. But I see that there is a demand, and I don't understand why. The real issue is that likely they find something radical they can respond to. And that's the thing, when you're radical, when you give something that is true, that is alive, young people will respond. Obviously, we're not talking about the huge crowds we used to have, like in the 70s, in the 60s, but that's the issue. So I see, while people was talking before, I was thinking a lot, because I always think about a prophecy by Ratzinger that said that the church will be smaller and will be deprived of its structures, but will be still there because there is a flame. And then I was thinking, yes, we're in this situation. And then I see also in the chat a lot of discussion about, how to decolonize. And we're in a path. I mean, the church started the decolonization a long time ago, but because it started the depoliticization 100 years ago, because mostly those issues were generated and controlled by politics. So the more we kind to be more pure and more secluded and more radical in what we are, the more we're going to have young people. It's not an easy path, because history is like a pendulum, we swing to one side and we swing toward the other, and it's very hard to find a balance. It takes time. But we're in the path. I mean, I want to see that we're in the path. Obviously, there are issues. Obviously, there are, but young people will come. I'm pretty sure they will come if there is this flame, this authenticity behind.
Thank you very much, Andrea. This reminds me also, this is a reflection of a bigger things going on, like the new social movement, that rather than having large causes, now we are going to smaller groups and smaller movements, depending on our personal preferences, rather than the big causes like anti-imperialism, social justice, and whatnot. But now we are moving to smaller movements. And this is from the new social movement, which is also a reflection of what is going on in the larger society. There are burning questions in the chat box. May we hear from Christopher? He has been raising his hand for a very long time. It's good it's virtual. If not, if it's physical, he's going to be so tired by now. Yes, Christopher.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. I'd just like to ask this question of all the panelists. How can academics and journalists work together to actually bring the thoughts, the ideas, the findings of academics to the common sphere? Because generally, academics will be speaking in their own language, in their own academic language, which the common person would find hard to understand. And you need journalists to translate that into the language that everyone can understand, you see. Because definitely, I mean, from the conversations that we've had here, academics have discovered interesting, important things about the faith, about how the faith engages with the world. And that needs to be translated, and conveyed to the common man so that everyone can benefit from it. So my question is, how can academics and journalists work together, in order to bring their findings, the findings of academics to the common man, and therefore we have a wider audience, which I think is what you want, rather than to keep all these findings within academia. I'm a journalist myself. I've been a journalist for many years, and I think that how can we have this kind of a working relationship? Yeah, if the panelists are willing to touch on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Although I think Andrea already touched on some of these, but we could hear from Andrea again for clarifications, maybe elaboration.
Well, it's mostly what we're doing now. We're talking together, we're listening to each other, and we have to find a way. Journalist needs to find the language, academic needs to find the general pattern. It's a path, but my general point is that find good journalists, find good people, find trained people, find people you can trust. It's personal. It's based on your personal sensitivity. Sometimes I speak to professors and I cannot get what they say because there is not that kind of click you can find between one person because I don't like, but there is another journalist that can. So you have to find this personal relationship because these are important. We think in this world that we can do everything by email and we can just chat and that's it. Doesn't work. I still do the interviews talking personally to people as much as I can because I want to see them in their eyes, whatever we do, because that way you can understand the rationale behind. If you do that, and obviously academia needs to train journalists. You have to train, and training is not an easy task because training so far has been technical, but it's not about content, it's not about psychology, it's not about studying. It's about how you write, how you do things, and so far that's good. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not good, but it's not enough.
Thank you, Andrea. Heidi, would you like to jump in from a more academic, as a scholar working on this for a long time now?
Yeah, I think one of the things is, I think a lot of universities value kind of public scholarship now in a way that they didn't, 10, 20 years ago. And so I think that creates space basically for scholars, you to kind of, whether it's to, reach out to the media to be good respondents when the media does come knocking, as well as kind of producing content. And there's a lot of, blogs, there's a lot of news outlets that encourage academics to publish articles. I've published several on kind of the Catholic Church and media, and so called The Conversation, and it really is focused on academics translating the work. I think the second thing is that I'm a former journalist in a different life as well. But one thing I've noticed is once you're quoted in the press, you're the go-to person for that topic. And so I find that sometimes people come to me before they come to other people, which I know have way more kind of personal connections and insights on the church to speak to. And so I kind of feel like it's my responsibility not just to kind of be a good respondent to the media, but also to kind of connect the media with other people. So I'm forever sending recommendation context. I encourage journalists to, hey, if you're looking for a story and someone to interview, send me an email. I'll send you a couple kind of recommendations. And I think that can be a way that we partner with journalists of kind of being good respondents, but B, kind of as helping them kind of get to the right people and not just the same voices over and over.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Heidi, for reminding us. I'm an academic myself, and I refuse all requests for interviews. Yes, I should learn how to engage. We have a question regarding two things, but I think this is more academic questions, but still very important, is how do we deal with Eurocentric narratives from Eric? And I'll string it to the question on Father Frank's question on money, and I suppose this is the neoliberalization of academia.
May I jump in?
Yes,
Or
please.
Anthony, you want to go first, maybe?
You can go ahead, no problem.
I have all kind of thoughts to share. An experience for when the Pope came to Asia, Pope Francis, in September, and when he died not long ago, twice my university refused to publicize article I published in the press. They always found excuses. So I agree with the idea that there is a general evolution that universities are more and more welcoming to pushing scholars to be publicly engaged, and yet there are sensitive topics that we don't want to publicize. So I have first-hand experience of my institute being frustrated by the attitude of the university refusing to publicize what I've been doing. Anyway, so it's a bit complex. In terms of media engagement, I tend to, and maybe I'm not idealistic or not enough, or too. So I will highlight that my parents are farmers, and at my parents' house, we still have 2,000 pigs, and it matters to me. So academia is not my natural environment. It's life mistake. It's an accident that hopefully I will escape one day. But I tend to talk to every single journalist coming to me that I don't pick. I have some excellent relationship, real trust, and I love it. And yet I do spend hours. I remember 1 hour talk with a female journalist from Bloomsburg, and then being furious at reading what she wrote after that, because it was exactly the opposite of what I've been trying to explain for 1 hour. And the problem in this case that you cannot give, unlike with your students where you can give them a bad grade, you can't do anything about it. So anyway, one thing I try to engage with all levels to build different types of relationship, because sometimes you just want a quick call of 10 minutes. I know if my phone starts buzzing at 6 p.m., it's because there is a new nomination of bishop in China. It's 6 p.m. Singapore, 12 in Rome, and suddenly they want a very quick explanation. Anyway, I also try, and it's not always easy, to identify colleagues, and I've been doing this more and more, pushing some of my colleagues to say, okay, this journalist is going to call you, please take the time, try to explain. It's not easy, it's a real challenge, and we are pushing through ISAC academics to challenge our own fear in terms of talking to the media, because it's very, very two different types. And so it's not just understanding academics, it's also academics being scared of the wording or kind of things. I also think it's good to generate conversations. So when Pope Francis came, I was shocked by the very poor interview given by Cardinal Tagle and highly, highly publicized by all Vatican media. And so I published a response. So it's a bit brave or bold, I don't know, but I think sometimes it cannot just be a one-shot thing in the media. There is too much of, okay, one publication, but no one talked to each other. So I think it's good. So when the Pope came, I published a response against Cardinal Tagle and against the documentary produced by EWTN to say, okay, can we deepen up a bit instead of here my analysis? Or so that's just a few ideas. Sorry, I stop here.
Thank you, Michelle. Anthony, would you like to jump in, please?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, the idea of how Catholic scholars, especially in my Asian context, can contribute to this decolonization of Catholicism. And I think one of the ways is to dialogue and engage in conversation with individuals from other colonial contexts. And I think well, we don't want to focus on just Catholicism itself, but also on gender and culture and all these various things that are the product of colonialism. So I think we need to engage, especially with our dialogue partners, with women, with people from other cultures, with people from other contexts in the global south. I think we need to hear all these different stories, different contexts, in order to get that larger picture about the Catholic experience. Because I don't think the Catholic experience is an isolated experience, but it is an experience that is embedded within a much more encompassing experience of colonialism. And so, in order for us to really decolonialize, we need to really engage with all these various dialogue partners.
Thank
And
you.
I
Thank
jump in
you.
on this. I'm very sorry. That's why I mentioned the farm of my parents, the colonial thing. Because yes, I'm a French, but I'm also the son of farmers, and my twin sister is married to a milk farmer. So I think I'm careful with this narrative of the West versus the East, because in the East, populations are not homogeneous. They are, for instance, social class. And 2 weeks ago, we were in Flores, a very rural island, and I really felt at home. Where in Singapore, it's a very urban, different dynamics, where it's less my environment, but I cope with it. But I mean, what do we mean by colonial? Also, sometimes I think colonial can mean something, a type of power relation that indeed, I mean, a ruling class that is totally disconnected with larger people. I think that, I don't know, how do we define colonial? What does that mean? And if we define it as a ruling class that is totally apart from the people, sometimes when I see how some church dynamic and clericalism, I would like to say that we became more colonial over the past decades than when European powers were controlling large territories of Asia and where missionaries were involved in evangelization. So to me, we cannot reduce colonialism to some kind of racial binary opposition between Western and Westerns. We have to keep up issues of social class, for instance. For me, being the son of farmers really helps to relate to all kind of population in Asia, and also to keep in mind which kind of power dynamic we are trying to question and challenge when we talk about colonialism.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michelle. We have a lot of questions actually and comments, but because of
Time.
yeah, due to time constraint, I really apologize that I am unable to perhaps read. I tried to touch on some of the big questions like the colonialism, and perhaps we were not able to talk about neoliberalism of academia. And our one of our speakers, Heidi, has to leave early because she has another meeting at immediately after this. So at this point, and I am sorry also, I would not be able to accommodate some of the questions, and the hands are still raised due to time constraints. So thank you so much for your time and for joining us on our 4th anniversary. Thank you. Thank you very much. And for always joining us for our regular participants. And for those who just joined us today, thank you also. And we hope to see you, hopefully, to see you again next time if we have this kind of discussions again. And at this point, I would like to thank our very valuable, our speakers who gave us valuable insights, Anthony Leduc, Andrea, Heidi, and Michelle. And thank you so much for the audience. This is one of our online roundtable with a lot of discussions in the chat box. So thank you so much for your attention, your time. I know it's late in some of our time zones, so thank you so much for joining us, and hope to see you again. And happy anniversary to ISAC.